going to change the way that you look at abortion forever. And it will help you form your conscience in a way that one day might save somebody's life. Now, I always tell my son, he is 18 years old, I always tell him that we need to pray every single day that we will have the strength and the courage to do what God may ask us to do at some point in our life. Now, what Michael Clancy was telling you about cost him something. It took a lot of courage and a lot of sacrifice. He had to really be willing to suffer to be able to make all of these miracles happen. And at some point in your life, God made you ask something like this of you. And if you have not prayed in advance for the courage to be able to do it, you may not find the courage to do it in that moment. And that would be such a mistake. For instance, imagine, just for a moment, imagine that if one day you were raped and you found out that you were pregnant. If you have not already thought about what you would do in advance, you may not have the courage to do what God is asking you to do then. To be generous with your life for the sake of someone else. And when people say that women have a right to choose, they never finish the sentence. They never finish the sentence. They don't say the right to choose what. They forget that a real person's life is hanging in the balance of that decision. A beautiful person's life. And as you meet these two beautiful women and you hear their stories, I want you to think about what a gift they are to the world. And I want you to think about how impoverished our world would be without them. And remember today that there is somebody who is missing from this stage, somebody that you will not get a chance to meet, someone who never got a chance to be here. And that was my own child. It was the child that I aborted when I was 18 years old. And as you look around the room today and you see these yellow tapes and the stories of a person who is missing, you might get an idea of just how much we have lost. Because my child might have been one of your best friends. My child might have been your future husband or your future wife. But the one thing that I know is that my life is impoverished because my child is not here with me today. And all of our lives are lost because of those who are missing. So please open your minds and your hearts to hear the beautiful story that Rebecca Kiessling is going to share with you now.
Well, I'm going to give the first part of my story now, and then you'll hear the rest if you're at the workshop. I was adopted nearly from birth, and like many adoptees, for years I dreamed of being able to meet my birth mother. My search began on my 18th birthday, and I was shocked to have been told on that day that that door was closed, that I would never have the opportunity to meet her, and it was very difficult for me. All these years I just had this expectation. After all, it was my information. The family that I grew up in looked nothing alike. My mom's 5 feet, my dad's 5'7". They both have dark hair, glasses. My brother is 6'6". And people would just look at us and say, "Were you adopted?" And I always felt like it was just a big thing, and that I was so different from everybody else. I was never in on conversations like, "Oh, so what's your nationality?" Well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, what's next? I thought I had reached it. Is it on now?
Yes, it is.
No? Okay. Sorry. And they'd say, "What do you mean you don't know?" And then I'd say, "Well, I was adopted." And then going to a doctor's office. "So what's the family history on this?" "Well, I don't know. I was adopted." And that family was Jewish. I went to 5 years of Hebrew school 3 days a week. I was bat mitzvahed and everything. And I remember studying the 12 tribes of Israel and being sent home to do a family tree. And it was explained to us that theoretically you could trace that bloodline all the way back and just how significant it was to be one of God's chosen. Well, my classmates would remind me, as I well knew, that I wasn't really one of them. And I was called names, and I felt like I was outside of God's grace.
And if I could just meet this birth family, then I could find out where I fit into this world and into God's plan, if at all. Quite frankly, God was irrelevant in our household growing up, so I just didn't even know about this whole God thing. And then that 6'6" brother, who was a year and a half older than me, used to beat me up all the time. He went on to get into quite a bit of trouble. The first time the police knocked on our door, he was in 3rd grade. Sad to say, he's been in and out of jail and prison from the age of 16. He has spent most of his adult life in prison. And when we were both in high school, my parents couldn't understand this, how they could have a daughter who's heading off to law school someday and this son that's in all this trouble. I like to joke that my parents are quite proud of both their children. We're both involved in the law, the lawyer and the outlaw. So my dad picks up this book on the criminal mind, and there's a lot of other books out there like it that explain that socially deviant behavior is genetic. Well, great. We all felt quite comfortable with that explanation, so my parents didn't have to look at all the poor choices that they made with their very liberal parenting style. My dad said it was his hands-off philosophy. Let them be and they'll turn out okay. Well, that backfired because my brother had his hands on a whole lot of trouble. But I was very pleased with this explanation as well. So then when I would go to school and people would ask me, Eric Wasser, isn't that your brother? I'd be able to say, yeah, but we were both adopted. So, you know, we're not really related. And that became my genetic disclaimer. And that applied to my adoptive mother as well. My mom, who raised me, is bipolar. That's manic depressive, highs and lows and mood swings. She was finally diagnosed over 10 years ago, got on some medication for it, and today we have some degree of peaceable relations. But growing up, nobody wanted to come over my house. And as a teenager, trying to sort through all of this, make sense of it, my brother with all of his trouble, my mom with her antics, my dad with the stress of it all, who became very abusive, I just figured I must come from something better. And again, if I could just meet this birth family, then I could find out just what that looked like. So at 18, I petitioned for my non-identifying information. And when it arrived, it had everything you can imagine about my birth mother except for her name. It had her eye color, hair color, height, weight, age, the age of my half-brother and half-sister, who were 11 and 13 when I was born, her ethnicity, religious background, occupation, educational level, detailed medical history. And I just hung on to every word. But then for my father, it said that he was Caucasian and of large build. And that was it. And I thought, that sounds like a police description. I mean, come on, she couldn't even say his eye color, hair color, nothing. I thought it over for about a week. I mean, what could the possible explanation be? And then I called up my caseworker and I asked her, was my mom raped? And she said, yeah, I didn't want to tell you. And I was just devastated. I remember feeling so ugly and so unwanted and thinking, who would ever love me? Who's ever going to want to marry me and have a family with me? Because after all, socially deviant behavior is genetic, right? I mean, that's what we had believed, and now all of a sudden part of my genes include that of a serial rapist. And I had to reconcile that with my own life. What does that mean about who I am? Do I have this ugliness lurking inside of me? If I would give birth to a son someday, would he become a rapist? And I really believe that a nice guy wouldn't want to get involved with someone like me. I had already experienced discrimination in dating with several different guys just because I was adopted, going to meet their family or friends and being told, you know, just don't mention that adoption thing, okay? Like as if that was something that I should be ashamed of, as if it made me a second-class citizen. And I thought, now how am I going to deal with this? And then of course at the same time I thought about the issue of abortion, because that's what you always hear about, right? Growing up, abortion wasn't talked about a whole lot in my family. When I was 12, my 16-year-old cousin had one, and I recall the discussion